Divante presents eCommerce Talks, where industry experts share their insights about the ever-changing world of e-commerce. Today we'll be talking with ex-VP of Marketing at Zalando and founder of Digital Spike, Dr. Felix Kreyer. This time we have a really special guest, Felix Kreyer. Felix, thank you for having me here.
Thank you, good to be here.
It's an honor, first of all, because I've been reading through your experience and as a marketer. There's tons of things I would love to ask you. So we're going to try to organize it pretty well and start with a little introduction from yourself. I mean, if you can tell us the last 10 years of your life, how they look like.
Sure. So, yeah, good to be here. I'm Felix. I'm German and have been in e-commerce, mostly fashion e-commerce, for about 9 years now. I originally started my career with McKinsey as a consultant in Berlin, and have been working with a couple of startups. Spent over 2 years with Zalando. And I mean, there's never been a non-heavy growth phase, but that was really a heavy growth phase in 2012 to 14. And was then a managing director with Marco Polo, a German fashion brand, where I was taking care of all the digital parts of the business, own e-commerce, wholesale e-commerce, multi-channel loyalty. And then I founded my own company, Digital Spike, last summer, which is sort of a consulting company with a bunch of people with heavy experience from the industry, e-commerce professionals, trying to help mostly brands, also some retailers, in accelerating their digital business.
So I have to do my job and ask you about Zalando, because Zalando is one of the most recognizable brands in fashion and online shopping, and the way they grow from a small platform to a behemoth right now is amazing. So if you were there through the whole transformation, through the whole growth, like you said, the rapid growth. So what do you think played a key part of this growth, and why actually made it happen?
Yeah, I mean, Zalando is amazing. It's still amazing today how after all those years they still manage to be sort of quite fast, quite agile, and still grow at a very heavy pace. And I mean, the time I joined Zalando was I joined 2012. The company was around 4 years old back then, and it was like a steady flow of new faces from all over Europe, building up IKEA tables and chairs every week, and really, I mean, they had a fantastic track really of hiring talent and good people into the company. I think it was also back then one of the first companies where you could actually work and live in Berlin without speaking a word of German. That's which is great, really international. And I think there's a few factors that Zalando benefited from. I mean, I think one thing is really big kudos to the founders, to Robert Gens and David Schneider. Also Ruben Ritter, who's the third managing director. I mean, they really put up pretty bold targets all the time, and they managed to achieve and overachieve them. So they really believed in it and in the idea. I think also time was right, to be honest. It was perfect timing, not only to, I think back in 2008, it was not a crystal clear case that fashion would become the next big vertical in e-commerce. Everybody was very skeptical about return rates and everything, and Zalando, they did the opposite. I mean, they actually, the free shipping and free return was one of the main USPs of Zalando. So they actually also to some extent took away the fear of many first-time fashion e-com buyers. And then I think also time was right in terms of the approach to marketing. I mean, Zalando was one of the really first startups that went for TV advertising big time. They had very loud and very different TV campaigns, which really helped to boost the awareness for the brand in no time in Germany and also in other markets. And I think that's something, if you do today or even just 5 years later, no way you would have been able to create such a buzz and awareness with TV advertising. Yeah, so I think there's a few factors, but it's certainly a very unique case, I think, in Europe. Yeah.
No, for sure. I mean, and something that it calls my attention a lot is I was in Berlin last year and remember joining a Zalando meetup, and there was like 5 or 6 data scientists from Zalando. So for me, it was very like, why do you have so many data scientists? Like, what's
I'm sure there's more,
probably now, yeah. I mean, but what is the role that tech is playing in the innovation of Zalando?
I think the interesting part is Zalando never really started as a fashion company, and I think that's the reason why it was so successful. It really also disrupting the industry. Yeah, it was in the beginning, in the early days, was a performance marketing machine, and it was a tech company. Yeah? I think those were the 2 core competencies that Zalando really had. No logistics, no fashion know-how. That was something that was built up over time, and also the first people that worked for Zalando, I think they had no clue in fashion really, but it's more about they had an idea of internet business models. They had an idea of how you work with data, how you acquire customers on the performance marketing side, and then also how important it is to have technology know-how in the company to really grow and scale the business. And also Zalando is very famous still today for trying to do not everything, but pretty much everything themselves. Yeah, I mean they've also started up tech hubs in Finland, in Portugal, and other markets. And I think that's really the core belief that tech is the driver of the business, and it's almost like a fashion tech company. That was also a term that was used quite often back then.
So there's almost like tech was beyond the actual product.
Yeah, I mean to some extent probably yes. And I mean if you told this to sort of the ordinary old-fashioned fashion guy, either from brands or from fashion retailers, they would all laugh at you, And this fashion as a core competence is so deeply embedded in the DNA of most of the companies in the industry that Zalando really had a very different approach there that made them also ultimately so successful, I think.
Now, when companies, I mean, Zalando is already a massive name. But there's still a lot of startups trying to do what Zalando did, or trying to replicate the model. Where do you see that they're actually moving forward or not moving forward? What is there something stopping them to reach the Zalando model, or do you think it's just because the market is full?
I don't know, to be honest, if there's really, I mean, probably copying the model in some other verticals. You can see that. I think in fashion, it's becoming more and more difficult to. I mean, Zalando is market leader in most of the European markets they're in, and it's going to be more and more difficult to establish the same kind of business model besides Zalando. Also, because I mean, especially this approach of really optimizing performance marketing to the max is something that was obviously much easier some years ago compared to today, where you have. All brands have their own e-commerce, and you have tons of different multi-brand providers. They're all bidding on Google keywords. At the same time, search is moving from Google to Amazon. So I don't see the potential to still optimize in a field where pretty much everything's optimized already. Yeah. So I think that to that extent, it's actually quite difficult. If you look at other verticals, I think, I mean, fashion being a really big vertical, to be honest, but this idea of being a specialist, let's call it a specialist e-com company. Might also want to call it a niche, but I think the idea is really specialist. Be it in beauty, be it in sports or special sports categories, or be it in pet food, or pet, any kind of verticals you can think of. I think this idea still works, especially when in a world where, from a retailer perspective, the biggest threat is obviously Amazon, who is a big box everything store. But which is not as specialized on a customer experience in a specific category that has certain needs for all sorts of elements of the user experience.
But that's something to me is very key. The customer experience. Amazon still looks almost the same. I mean, even though they try Prime and a bunch of different things, it still looks very similar to what it was a long time ago. Zalando, on the other hand, and not only Zalando, but the experience that you had after with Marco Polo, it was more customer-centered. It was more about the experience.
Yes, no, I mean, I wouldn't say it's more customer-centered, because I think to some extent you can't be more customer-centered than Amazon. But it's true that Amazon is more about the convenience aspect of it, not so much about if you just take the example of buy clothes on Amazon, the shopping experience is much less of a pleasant one, and you would also probably be less likely to use Amazon as a first destination for discovery. while if it's for search, it's great. Yeah, and I think to that extent, that's also a thing where Zalando can still stand out compared to Amazon. Yeah? It's just much more fun to shop fashion on Zalando. On the other hand, everything around convenience, be it delivery convenience, be it customer service and service levels on Amazon, but also the sheer fact that you have so many different services that sort of create also a login effect. It's not only about shopping, but it's also about, and it's shopping in many categories. I mean, you can buy your firewood on Amazon as well as your clothes. But also in terms of video streaming, you have Audible, you have Prime Music, you have all sorts of add-on services which create a login effect. So I would definitely not say it's not customer-centric. I think it's very customer-centric. But I agree that the sheer front end and the user experience on the site or in the app is much more tailored towards the specific category that a company like Zalando is in on a page like Zalando.
And when you leave Zalando and try to move towards Marco Polo, like what are the things that you could easily replicate into a fashion brand like Marco Polo?
It's obviously a completely different world. I mean, on the one hand, it's a brand versus retailer or marketplace, but more importantly, it's also it's old economy versus new economy to some extent. Yeah, and I mean, I think the good thing about brands as opposed to retailers, I think if you're a retailer today with a history and a legacy, and you've been out there 20, 30 years ago, most of them are really having a really bad time and really hard time also finding their USP today and just finding any aspect and any argument why a customer should buy from them instead of Amazon, Zalando, and the other pure players. I think if you look at brands, it's a different story. I mean, brands still have a product; it's their product. Nobody else has the product. It's a brand heritage. So it's to some extent it's in a healthier position. Other problems, other challenges, and I think what you find in legacy companies is obviously a completely different speed, completely different approach also to priorities. I mean, thinking about the discussion we just had on tech. I mean, look at any fashion brand, and Marco Polo is not an exception. I would not say that tech is at the core of their skill set and of what they believe is important for them going forward. Neither is data, working with data, business intelligence, or simply using the data that they sit on. And I mean, brands sit on tons of data. So this kind of thing, I think, bringing a bit of this also perspective from a pure play company like Zalando is super helpful for all economy companies, and also having people, and I'm not only talking about myself, it's also on every level, having people on board that have experienced the speed and the agility and the approach of young startup pure play companies, and then also to some extent creating a bit of uproar in the organization and make sure that the established companies also get a feel of what the speed is out there and to what extent they need to change. I think that's very helpful.
Now you accumulated a lot of experiences from Zalando, from Marco Polo, and from all your previous jobs as well. When you bring this to Digital Spike, when you create this company and try to, I mean, I like to call it a full stack consulting services because you're covering everything. But like how do you approach or companies, or also what kind of problems or what kind of consulting companies are needing nowadays? I mean, what do you see companies asking for?
So when you say covering everything, it's probably true to the extent that I've been a very much of a generalist management person all the last years. But there's quite a few areas where I also say this is something where there's much better consultancies out there, which I would not cover. And what I'm trying, my approach to market is trying to, obviously on the one hand to just bring really hands-on experience from the field to the companies, where you say, hey, we're not born as consultants, but we have all done it ourselves, and we've been there, and we know the issues, we know also sometimes we know how to solve them because we have made all the mistakes that you can possibly make. There's something a much better learning experience than saying, okay, we have all done it and we're all perfect.
I'll save you time and money, yeah.
Yeah, it saves a lot of time and money. And then I think, the challenge is I work with quite a few companies also that have been around before the internet and before e-commerce was a topic. And it's very important to have those two perspectives. On the one hand, to understand their specific challenges, which are much different from a challenge that a pure play company or startup has. But at the same time, also be very honest with them, tell them, look, we understand this perspective, and that's why we might have to find sort of different approaches. But the goal and the way of doing things, in the end, is pretty much the same. Because if you don't go with the speed of the market, then the others will eat you. Yeah? So I think it's very helpful to have those two perspectives on most of those companies, because they are struggling with. Some of them might not be doing very well. I'm working with retailers and brands who, have still a big portfolio of bricks and mortar stores, which is quite a burden these days because they have to pay rent, and many of them are losing footfall and also losing money. You have really legacy IT architectures where, sometimes even without a person that it really has the overview and is driving the technology as a business driver rather than a support function. And then telling these companies you have to be there where Zalando or others are, while today you're here, is obviously not very helpful. So you have to find ways with them to solve it and to make progress. Despite and given their current state and setup.
How you do that? Because I can imagine most companies will come and say, like, we want to be the next Zalando, or we want to be the next. What sort of plan will you set in place, or what would be the first step that you recommend to companies to, like, look, before you go global, before you go big, start by doing this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, and again, the companies that want to be the next Zalando, I would probably have a hard time helping them achieve their target, to be very honest. And I'm also wondering if that's always the best target for them. I think if we take a brand as an example, the most important question to me is always, what's your USP as a brand? Why has the world been waiting for you, or why can't the world do without you, or the customers do without you? And I have the experience that many companies already struggle answering this question. There's obviously an idea and there's a heritage and something around it, but really if the internet does one thing, then I think it creates massive amounts of transparency. And while maybe 10, 20 years ago, let's say in fashion, for example, it was easy to say, okay, we have a pretty commodity product. We put a logo on it, a label, and then we do a bit of marketing around it. That usually would do the job, at least for some time. Yeah? I think now it's impossible to stick out if you just do a commodity job on anything. You have to be special, and you have to stand for something, and you really have to not only have a message, but also a product that stands out. And this, I think, is the first question before you even start thinking about technology know-how, about digital sales channels, whatever the specific question is. Yeah? And once you work on this with a company, then I think it gets much easier also to solve all the different steps that you need to solve on the way to, whatever the target is, maximizing revenue or optimizing profit. Then you can start thinking about what are the right sales channels for you as a brand. Then you can think about how do I do selective distribution. Then you can see, okay, when it's not that you say everybody has to build up tech know-how. Nobody knows really why, but you have to build up because everybody does this. So then you also have to say, okay, what you need tech capabilities for, who might be the right partner for you if you don't have the resources to hire 20 tech people, and you will not find them anyway. So that's a bit I think the first starting point. And it's not so much about, hey, everybody does own webshop, everybody does marketplace, everybody builds an app, everybody is great on social media. We also need to do it. We don't know exactly why, but everybody does it, so it seems to be the right thing. And in the end, the result might be the same. So they will end up with social media and with webshop and these kind of things if they don't have it anyway. But I think it's much better if you develop this from the really core and not just as we need to do it because everybody does it.
Now, something that you mentioned about the human talent to find the right people for the right operation or growth or whatever you have in mind as a brand. there's two ways nowadays, right? You can either spend a lot of time trying to find the right people and hire the right people, teach them the culture of the company, or on the other hand, you can just go and try to outsource everything. And obviously, you're in the middle of there because people will come and ask you, like, what should I do? Like, should I point me in the right direction of what's my next step? How do you see it? I mean, not only convenience, but the pros and cons. Like, should companies build their own teams and spend all this time and effort to get them their own, or just try to find people with experiences and just get it done?
I think as usual, there's no black or white answer. It really depends. I think, I mean, what I observe is, let's say, lesser skills are in an organization in the required areas, the more difficult is it for companies to find the right partners also, because it does not help if you have 5 different external partners or a team of 20 freelancers if you have no one in the company who actually knows what is the right people and what do I really want them to solve. I mean, also an agency or freelancer is just as good as he has a clear understanding of objective and what needs to be done. Yeah? So I think companies need definitely more and more to work in sort of flexible models. I mean, any company will not find full-time employees on every requirement they have, and they don't have to. So they will have to find ways to work with freelancers, externals, whatever. But I think what I often observe is, for example, there's a lack of, let's say, tech know-how in this case, or tech also resources, and then you just hire an agency or hire some freelancers. But in the end, the first thing you should do is you should probably hire a CTO to make sure that someone, or a CIO, someone in the company has the head on in terms of tech, and this person can then decide, okay, what's the right setup, the right partners, what do we need to do ourselves, what do we need external. And this is the first step, and then you can do the second step. And I have the impression many companies do the second step before the first, and then end up being unhappy with whoever they have taken on board, because there's no clear communication of objectives and someone holding it all together.
So yeah, probably it will be better to have some sort of a link between what your company means and the company wants to sell towards any group of freelancers or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's also again around core competencies. I mean, I think in the not only long term but short to mid term, and let's stick with the topic of tech, it will be has to be a core competency of pretty much any company that's producing and selling products. Yeah? But is it the right approach now to say, okay, we have to build a hub with 30 tech people tomorrow without really knowing, what kind of profiles we need and what we need them for? Of course not. And if you look into those companies, there's often, also if you look at the board and who's part of the board and what capabilities, then you have sort of product capability, you have sales capability, you might have good marketing capabilities, but then tech is sometimes a support function somewhere under the, CFO or whatever where you want to put it. And it's then the people that, repair your laptop, but it's not the people that drive innovation in the company.
And exactly. I mean, I think I asked you in the beginning, like the role of innovation and that role towards the future. How do you envision the e-commerce and retail world in 10, 20, 50 years from now? I mean, obviously, there's tons of tools every day that are happening. A lot of startups offering microservices and this and that for companies like any retail company, or anyone who's selling a product. How do you envision the future, and not only for this kind of approaches, but also for brick and mortars, for example? Well, how do you see we're going to be buying our stuff from 10, 20 years from now?
Yeah. To be honest, 20 years, I have no idea. It's too far away. I mean, I think what you see already today, that the boundaries and differences between channels will disappear. Yeah? And that's also probably not a very bold statement, because you see this happening already. So it's not so much about do I buy offline, do I buy online? I mean, today already everything is mobile. I think customers don't want to walk somewhere, see if it's available, and if they're lucky and it's available, take it with them in a big paper bag or whatever. So I think it's clearly not going to be about channels, but it's going to be about creating a customer experience that's, and I hate to call it omni-channel, multi-channel, because the word channel in the end is not relevant. It's more about making sure that you are where the customer is, and this might also be on the smartphone, doesn't have to be in the specific location, and that you actually make it as easy as possible for the customer to run a transaction and buy your product. Yeah?
So it's really a mix of getting sales, marketing, tech, everybody together to figure out, all right, how is our customer acting towards our brand, and where are they buying our brand? And
absolutely, and I think it's all about thinking from the customer. I mean, if you can have tons of shitty, and I can use the word again, multi-channel examples today. If you go somewhere and you go into a store and either the technology doesn't work, or there's no one who can check if something's available online, or they might actually have the wrong incentives they don't want to check because then it's not their sales. You go there and want to return something, this also doesn't work, or if it works, you don't get your money back, but you have to find a different way of reimbursement. I mean, there's tons of examples why it doesn't work, yeah. And I mean, ultimately, the technology is all there. I mean, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able today. And I mean, Amazon does it also with their stores. You should be able today to run into any store, pick a piece, maybe scan it if needed, and then take it home, and then you're done. But literally nobody is offering this because they're all having trouble getting their shit together in terms of systems and setup.
It's true, and well, I mean, there's tons of companies and brands being created every day. I mean, that's not going to stop. I mean, even though there might be big players that took over already the market, but with the creation of new brands and all these new startups coming up with new things, if you have to recommend them something, what will be the first step? What do they need to do first before they move into putting anything out? I mean, I know you talk about the niche and you talk about the certain things, but I have a brand. What's my first step into moving into e-commerce?
I would say it's again a very similar question that I asked before. Why has the world been waiting for you? What's new? If you're really honest, and being honest also means if you listen to your consumer, and that sometimes can be very painful, ask the consumer and find out if it's really the right, and it can be any sort of product. And if it's not, then adjust it, and it's something you should do at a very early stage. Yeah? So it's all about prototyping, an MVP kind of approach, and directly testing with the consumer, and then really stop doing things where the consumer tells you at an early stage. I mean, there's no better feedback you can get, and change it. Yeah? I think that's the opportunities are out there today. It's much easier. It's never been easier to do this, and brands still take too little advantage of it.
Felix, if you have to recommend a good podcast and a good book for the people that's watching, what will be those?
Yeah, I'm afraid this is very German, I guess, my focus. And also, as we're at the K5 conference, has been a couple of quite German days, which is good and bad. Yeah? It's a great community. I have my good friend Arman Farsi. He recently joined the company Fanatics, and he's had a very popular podcast in Germany, which was called Commerce Corner. Right. Some of the episodes are also in English, and now he put up a new podcast which is called Fast Break. So it's fast and then break with BREYK.
All right.
Just took his first 3 or 4 episodes online. You can also hear me in one of them, and this is something if you want to get a very diverse perspective on different e-commerce and also more digital. General digital topics. This is definitely one thing I can recommend.
Well, if we're going to pass the message and then maybe link our audience to go take a look. Felix, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being here. We definitely learned a lot from your experience, and I hope people back at home they also did. And thank you. We hope to have you again in the show in the near future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.